بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على سيد الرسل وخاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله الأزكياء وأصحابه الأتقياء أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope everyone is well. MashaAllah, we've concluded our series in regards to adversity. Now, before we kind of continue on with anything, we had been thinking to maybe kind of just figure something out in terms of how we want to move forward. And we really had an idea that we should do something a bit more collaborative. Alhamdulillah, with the Helping Hand team, which I myself am a part of, we also have a lot of very, very talented and very knowledgeable individuals. One of whom is our very own Sheikh Abdurrahman Kariye, mashallah, who's here with us today, mashallah, to be
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. جزاك الله خير الأستاذ الشيخ حارس ما شاء الله. It is an honor to be here with you and with all of our viewers from around the world, wherever you are. I hope you're staying safe and healthy, inshallah ta'ala. I hope that you're doing well and you're keeping well with yourself. And we wanted to do this program where we kind of socialize while we are distancing. And each one, of us is doing the right thing by staying at home and, keeping others safe. And we decided to just have this daily discussion with our Helping Hand, members, and to kind of, interact and have discussions about Islamic topics that are unique to us. And my good friend here, Ustad Haris Sheikh, mashallah, is the student final year in Al Qalam Institute. He's studying with some, mashallah, some of the most renowned mashayikh in America, the likes of Sheikh Abdul Nasir and Ustad Abdurrahman Murphy and many other mashayikh across the country. And he's been doing a really, really nice program on a daily basis, talking about how to keep your iman in a time where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion. So he finished the series and then he said, "Why don't you join me?"
Yeah.
So
we wanted some real knowledge, Chef. That's what it is.
No, that's not what it is. Yeah, so he's all the way in Dallas right now, and I'm all the way in Seattle. And through this blessing and of technology, we're able to connect with all of you from the comfort of our homes, and you're able to view us from the comfort of your home. So Alhamdulillah, it's a ni'mah and it's a blessing to have this. I was just the other day, I was telling Sheikh Yasser Qadi, right, when you were in like the backstage of the online thing, and I was telling him how of a blessing and a ni'mah it is to have this technology. It was like, can you imagine living in the 90s and we were quarantining? I mean, imagine what would life would have been, and then just think about what Ramadan would be like, without technology, without being able to connect. So
double-edged sword for sure. But Sheikh, I was reading also just a little bit of your background. It's funny because I totally thought you went to the University of Medina, but you very strongly corrected me and told me that you went to the University of Al-Azhar, mashallah. So you're Azhari, which is why you enjoy wearing the long flowing jubbas and the fez and everything, right?
Well, alhamdulillah, I went to Egypt and stayed there, and alhamdulillah, I had the fortune of studying with mashayikh there. Egypt was probably the best days of my life, and this was the good old Egypt days when things were much better. Alhamdulillah, came back. We got involved in the da'wah field. We got involved in the work of da'wah here, served as imam here locally in Seattle for the last several years. It's been really, really good. It's a service that I think, I used to take it as something, well, what does an imam do? It's the chillest job, it's a goal that you could have. but this is it's actually a lot more difficult than what people think it is. And we owe them a great amount of gratitude for all that they do for us in our community. So if you know an imam in your community, most likely you do, make sure you thank them and show a little bit of appreciation, because they give up a lot of time to service the community and the needs of people. So alhamdulillah, that's been the years of and we're all students of knowledge. None of us is ever going to be no one is going to say I'm done studying. Everyone is a student of knowledge, and everyone is learning and continuing to aspire to seek knowledge until they say that knowledge is min al mahdi ila lahdi. They say it's from the time you're born, in the cradle, to the time where you go to the grave. That's that's knowledge. The seeking of knowledge is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's I mean that it's that you really begin to realize that, I think, as you advance, the more you learn, the more you realize that you know nothing. I think in the very beginning you learn some basic masail. You're like, oh, for wudu, these are the sunnahs, these are the these are what are fard, this is what is mustahab, and you're like, okay, I'm an alim, I know what I'm talking about. That's like the first month of any program, and then from there, all of a sudden, you shift into this place where you're all of a sudden reading about advanced aqidah, and you're learning all these things about fiqh that are going really deep, and you're learning about masail through usul and all these advanced areas of study, and you're sitting there thinking back to that time when you were reading, basic, simple masail, and you're like, wow, I knew nothing then, and I still know nothing now.
The thing about this is that Islamic sciences are it's like you put your finger in the water, and then you realize that when you take it out, there's still so much remaining, right? It's just an infinity amount, and that's what knowledge is. You're dipping your finger in there, and then you're taking a little bit with you, but really it's like it's just so vast, and there's just a wide range of things to always continuing. And that's why it's in this time that we've been quarantined, staying at home, and just living through these really historic moments. I think it's like this is once in a lifetime, once in humanity, in the history of humanity. It doesn't happen.
Well, I mean, it has happened, similar stuff, but it's at least once in probably a century type thing. In 1918, they had the Spanish flu, and it's fascinating to read because they took similar steps. They had no gatherings of more than 10 people allowed. But even if you think about it, just even getting into the scientific element, which always just fascinates me, is the coronavirus, as it is, spreads at a rate of every 2 people. Every person who gets it on average will infect 2 people, whereas the flu is 1.1 to 1.2. And, so it's even compared to that, we have to take even more drastic measures today, in spite of all the technology that we have and all the, the things that are going on. But I'll tell you, Sheikh, that's something, subhanAllah, that really, really just blows your mind. And I know that this has been talked about ad nauseum, but it's just the world we live in has been so advanced, and we've just been moving, at such a rapid pace. And this is all of a sudden there's just this immovable object that has come on the railroad track, and the train had to stop, and nobody knows what to do right now.
And subhanAllah, this is an imtihan. It's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the beginning, before it arrived in the US and it arrived around the world, infecting so many parts of the world, people were just saying, "Oh, this is a punishment sent upon the people of China for the things that they were doing." And maybe a person could have come to that conclusion, maybe because of the fact that there was a lot of atrocities being committed by the government, the Chinese government, against the Uyghur Muslims. But to make that assumption and say that all these people were going through it, and then finally when it reached the lands of the Muslims, and then it reached us, even in the first world countries, in Western countries, and masajid were shut down, public schools were shut down. I mean, people were quarantining in their house. There was an economic fallout from all of this. And then people said, "Oh, well, it's a test to all of us." And I think that's the realization, that it's a test. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does things, that He tests us. But it's not the first time it's happened in history where Muslims have been in this kind of situation, where there, some sort of waba and ta'un happened to them. And actually, a lot of people, misunderstand the meaning of or the difference between ta'un and waba. You want to elaborate a little bit for them?
Yeah, so the idea of a ta'un, meaning that that's generally understood as a plague, and some of the commentators, of the past, Ibn Hajar and others, used to mention specifically things like, they would mention like pustules and things that would occur, and that was kind of considered to be a sign of the fact that it was a plague. But a lot of research has been done lately. My own teacher, Sheikh Muntasir Zaman from Qalam Institute, he actually has been doing some research on this as well. And he's kind of come to the conclusion, reading through different works of Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri, who I know you're a big fan of, mashallah. That's your Hanafi guy. He wrote on it, and actually, he wrote that the number of people who deserve martyrdom through, for their deaths, it can actually reach the number of 30, based on studies that he did of a Maliki scholar. And, subhanAllah, so he actually mentions that there's 3 traits that could result in someone acquiring the rank of martyrdom, which is that, what's specifically mentioned in the ahadith, the 3 scenarios are: number 1 is they have a prolonged and painful ailment; number 2, that they perhaps have a harrowing illness, as it's known as marad al-ha'il; and then they have, which is essentially, that would be like the plague, right? And then or a sudden calamity, bala mufaja, right? So these are the things that Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah essentially says, that these are the kind of some of the traits that you can find. Now, there is kind of a distinction in terms of what you would traditionally understand to be a plague versus waba, right? Which is like, waba is more like an epidemic of just sickness being spread around. The thing is that is, when you talk about plagues, the issue with plagues is they cause death, right? In large numbers. And that's where you would say that this shares a lot of similarities with the ta'un, versus the waba is just something where like everybody's just getting sick or something like that.
It's interesting because I think, was it Qadi Iyad, في شرح صحيح المسلم, a great scholar of Islam, Qadi Iyad rahimahullah, he was explaining from this chapter, the chapter that relates, the hadith relating to ta'un and waba. And he was mentioning, he said, فَكُلُّ طَاعُونَ وَبَاء وَلَيْسَ كُلُّ وَبَاءٍ طَاعُونًا. So he said that every ta'un is a waba, and every waba is not a ta'un.
Yeah.
So there's a distinction even in the Arabic language and in the understanding of fuqaha. And it's important because, the reward of dying from the ta'un in particular is a reward where the Prophet ﷺ said that person, not that one should ever desire to die from or meet his enemy. لا تتمنوا لقاء عدوكم. The Prophet ﷺ told us, do not desire to meet your enemy, even if that enemy is something that you can't see, like this. Don't ever desire for a death or ask for death. And that's a whole different discussion. But he says, Qadi Iyad explaining, he says that ta'un is actually قروح خارجية في الجسد. He said it is like wounds that happen to the outside of the body. But they say waba is any type of sicknesses that spread, and then it's called waba. And especially if it is if it kills a person, then it's definitely in the understanding of the fuqaha and those who study Islamic law. They say that if it is a killer, then it is a ta'un. فسميت طاعونا لشببها بالهلاك بذلك. It's very similar to it kills the person once it happens to them. The
So-
mortality rate is very high.
When we talk about the idea of every ta'un being a waba, but not every waba being a ta'un, what we're essentially saying is every plague is an epidemic, but not every epidemic is a plague, right? And so that's kind of how we would understand
Exactly. Yeah.
for anyone to just make sure that they're following along. But it is also interesting because there are narrations about the Prophet ﷺ even mentioning things. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh has a narration, although it has been criticized. Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he actually did, he basically, he weakened it because of the different, the various roots of the hadith in al-Mawdu'. There's not a lot of basis to say that it's necessarily, a sahih or necessarily even strong. But at the very least, it's something. And there are other narrations that are similar. In Abu Dawood, there's a narration in regards to someone dying and getting martyred from that jamb, meaning like some kind of pleurisy, illness that's related to their lungs. So clearly, there seems to be some scope, in regards to that. And why is this important? I think it's very important because anybody losing their family members, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on all those from our ummah who have passed, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all across the world who are ill. But for those, especially from amongst our ummah, they want to have that reassurance. It's really a big part of it, because how else are you supposed to get through this sudden shift in life? All of a sudden you were planning what you're going to be doing for summer vacation, and out of nowhere, in the span of 1, 2, 3 weeks, all of a sudden now you're just like, we don't even know if there's going to be people going out in summer. We don't know if there's going to be, even a winter that we can do things. And so it's a big shift very quickly. And that's why it's important to be able to offer that kind of the calmness for the heart. That, look, you're not going through this for no reason. And that's in the Quran too. I do think also, Sheikh, that that's one of the most beautiful elements of our deen, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not promise us an easy life here. Right? He promises us, in fact, his words are, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. I'm going to test you. I'm going to give you something to be fearful of, that you're going to have some hunger pains. You're going to have, you're going to deal with death and loss of life and fruits. All these things are going to be happening to you. So be ready for it. The people who are going to deal with that best are those who are patient. And would you mind elaborating on the idea of what patience necessarily means? Because a lot of people think it just means like staying silent and being in your home and not saying anything. But I think you can expand further on.
No, I mean, patience is one of the most virtuous acts of ibadah that you can do. It's an act of ibadah that you do where you persevere and you're patient and the scholars, they divide patience into 3 categories. As Ibn Qayyim says, as-sabru على الطاعة, he says, to be patient upon the obedience of Allah, والصبر عن المعصية, to stay away from, to be patient from, disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, والصبر على أقدار الله المؤلمة, and he says it is to be patient with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has, which is an adversity, when it's a difficulty, a hardship, to be patient in that. It's what the scholars have divided into the categories of sabr, anwa'u sabr they call it. So when you look at it right now, this is, obviously aqdarillahi al-mu'lima. It is from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's trying, it's difficult, it's a hardship on all of us in some way or form. Some people are experiencing it at a much more higher rate, the hardship maybe through the loss of life or the loss of wealth. But definitely it is a test for the believers and for all of us in humanity. It's a test to all of us. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he defined the best type of patience. He described the best and the best known way to be patient in the time of adversity and difficulty. One time, the hadith of Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, passing by a woman who is crying on the side of the grave of her child. So, and she was crying in such a way that she was wailing and hitting herself, and Islamically not appropriate. One should be able to recognize that Islam acknowledges, emotional, where you release your frustration, where you complain to Allah. إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. So yeah, and there's nothing wrong with one expressing their emotions and their feelings. The issue of concern for in Islam is that when it goes above and beyond what is permitted in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ himself cried at the loss of his son. وَإِنَّ الْحَيْنَ, he says, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَإِنَّ الْعَيْنَ لَتَدْمَعُ, he says, the eye shed tears. The heart, is aching, and it's hurting from this. So even the Prophet ﷺ went through emotional turmoil at the loss of life, at the loss of his uncle, the loss of his wife, the loss of his children. So there's definitely a room for emotional, expression, taking out your emotions. But what if,
I will say, Sheikh, that's something that I think has to be really, really kind of made very clear in our communities today, because I've been in janazas where people are basically, somebody comes up and says, "Hey, stop crying. You shouldn't be crying near the grave. You shouldn't be doing this," and it really, people don't understand that this is not crying that is referred to by wailing. Even making noises, right, in terms of crying, is not wailing. Wailing is a very particular act where someone is doing something, tearing their clothes, pulling off their hat, or smacking themselves. That's
swearing and saying words that or things that even take, because you lose your mind, right? You hear something that's like very, very bothering, and you can't accept the reality. So you start saying the worst things ever to everyone in front of you, out of frustration, out of anger. Even that's not allowed. So the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith I was telling you, the hadith of Anas bin Malik, he passes by that woman. The woman, she's crying on the side of the grave, and the Prophet ﷺ, he tells her, and he goes to her, he says, "Ittaqillahi wasbiri." He says, "Fear Allah and be patient." And she says, إِلَيْكَ عَنِّي. She says, "Leave me alone. فَإِنَّكَ لَمْ تُصِبْ بِمُصِيبَتِي." She says, "You have never seen the hardship and difficulty I'm going through," which is the end of the, something that you don't say to the Prophet ﷺ, knowing that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in countless places how many difficulties the Prophet ﷺ went through. So if the Prophet ﷺ was someone that was superior, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested him, just like how those who were before him and even his companions didn't think that the test he was absolved from going through trials in life. No, he went through the most amount of hardship and difficulty of any of the prophets. So the Prophet ﷺ, when this woman said this to him, he walked away from her and left her in her state.
To be fair to her, she didn't know it was him. So,
and that's where the Prophet, in the second part of the story, and where she's told that this was the Prophet ﷺ, she was not in her right mind, and she goes to the Prophet ﷺ's house, and she meets the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and she says, "Oh Messenger of Allah, لم أعرفك." She said, "I didn't know that it was you. I didn't know that it was you." And she begins to apologize. But the Prophet ﷺ said something very, very unique at that time, and something that defines what patience is. The best type of patience that you can ever show in the face when you're facing adversity and difficulty. Think about it like this. Let's say you get the news, God forbid, may Allah forbid from each and every one of us and protect all of us, but one of us is infected with COVID-19, or some relative of yours are infected with COVID-19. How is your reaction to that when you hear it? That's where this hadith becomes something that is so powerful. So the Prophet ﷺ said to this woman, إِنَّمَا الصَّبْرُ عِنْدَ صَدْمَةِ الْأُولَى. He says that patience is at the stroke. The best patience, let me correct it. The best patience is at the stroke of calamity. Subhanallah. You just think about that. The best type of patience you can exhibit at the time of adversity and difficulty is to be patient at the stroke of that calamity. When you hear that hardship befall you, how do you react to it? How do you respond to it? And that is the patience that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking for in a believer.
And, it's I think the best example of that, how to deal with that kind of the pain that one might feel in these situations. Because again, the question comes like, okay, well, we're talking about this very theoretically, okay? So what does that mean? What does it mean that patience is with the first strike? What is patience? How do I exemplify that patience? And I think what we see is that it's kind of what you said before. It's not lashing out. It's taking a beat and recognizing. And that's when you think about the words of even inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, right? Indeed to Allah we belong and indeed to Him we return. These words are a reminder for us that this life is so very temporary. Whatever I have in front of me, whatever issue I have, difficulty I have, at some point very soon, particularly relative to the scope of humanity, at some point very soon, I will be standing in front of God. And the problems that I find to be as big as they are now, they're not that big a deal. Not to minimize anyone's concerns or problems, but to give it perspective, you begin to realize that inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. I'm going to be in front of Him, and my problems in that moment are going to be what I really want to make sure that I solve. I want to be prepared for in those moments. And I think, subhanAllah, for us, the best example of this really is the Prophet ﷺ, because of course he is our example. But when he, after a Ta'if, and I mentioned this in one of my lectures, when he sat at the tree, what did he say? Allahumma ilayka ashku du'fa quwwati wa qillata hilati wa hawani ala nas. But he says, Allahumma ilayka ashku. Allah, I complain to you. He doesn't sit there and say, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why are you doing this to me, Allah? Why are you allowing these people to do these things to me? He's not, Addas who comes to him and saying, I had to go through this issue that these people threw rocks at me. Look, all this blood on me. Allahumma ilayka ashku da'fa. Right? That, Ya Allah, I don't know what I did. I don't know if what I'm doing is right, but Ya Allah, please just don't be angry with me. Right? That's his dua in that moment. So beautiful, subhanAllah. Very powerful. Angry with me. As long as you're not angry with me, I'm okay. I don't care. I don't care. That's the best example for us, is that, look, things will happen. Problems and mistakes will happen, but it is not about the fact that it's not about not reacting. Absolutely. You would be insane. You would be a psychopath or a sociopath if you didn't react to these things. But how you react is the question, is that you don't go and say, man, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Why did Allah allow this to happen? It's, subhanAllah, I'm devastated, but Allah's will. And we're going to do our best to get through this with Allah's help. You see that's and I think that's the big difference, is that's sabr. That is kind of stepping away from this realm of like, oh, woe is me, and into, I trust Allah. Allah, He put me in this spot. He doesn't test me with more than what I can deal with, and so He's going to take me out of this difficulty.
Subhanallah. Yeah, this is a time of great amount of difficulty, and this is the time in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be patient and to exhibit the acts of patience in time of hardship and difficulty. Wallahi, it's been something that I've been thinking about lately, about what's happening around the world, the masajids being closed, the situation of Ramadan. There is some sort of benefit. Back in the time in where the ta'un or some sort of waba used to happen, a contagious disease would spread among a community. It is mentioned that they would engage in an ibadah. They would find time to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and utilize that time in connecting back. There's a very beautiful statement, a record from Tabaqat Ibn Sa'ad, where he mentioned, and he says that the great tabi'i by the name of Masruq rahimahullah, that he used to yamkuthu fi baytihi ayyam at-ta'un. He used to stay in his house in the days in when there was a spread of a contagious disease. وَيَقُولُ, and he would say at that time, أَيَّمْ تُشَاغِلْ فَأُحِبْ أَنْ أَخْلُ لِلْعِبَادَةِ. He says that, if the أَيَّام تُشَاغِلْ فَأُحِبُّ أَنْ أَخْلُوَ لِلْعِبَادَةِ. He said, this is the days in where I love to keep myself busy, and I love to, dedicate myself to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَكَانَ يَتَنَحَّى فَيَخْلُو لِلْعِبَادَةِ. So when he was with his family, he would kind of like clear his throat, or and go, you know, in secrecy and in privately go and start worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his wife would say, and would, would say, فَرُبَّمَا جَلَسْتُ خَلْفَهُ. She said that sometimes, maybe at times, I would sit behind him. أبكي, I would cry at his situation. مما أراه يصنع بنفسه, from the actions that he's doing, the long standing, that he would do in prayer, and how he used to, exert himself in excessive worship. وكان يصلي حتى تتورم قدماه. And she mentions that he used to pray such a long prayer that until his his feet became swollen from the long standing in prayer. So this was the likes of people before us, who were so dedicated to and they would utilize this time in ibadah. So for me, when I think about Ramadan now out of the picture, the masjid is closed. Actually, one can look at it from a side of ni'mah and say, this is a time where I test myself and I see what type of person I am and how I worship Allah in private, when no one is with me, without a community. How do I do it where I stand up in prayer? I encourage my family to stand up in prayer with me. The house, becomes a house full of ibadah. We revive the house with the name of Allah and the recitation of the Quran, the dhikr of Allah. That, if a person has that, there's a believer always has to look at the positive side of every situation. The hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in where he said, عجبا لأمر المؤمن إن أمره كله خير وليس ذلك إلا للمؤمن. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that amazing is the affair of a believer, that in every situation is goodness for him. In أصابته سراء شكر, if goodness comes to his way, something good, something that makes you happy, that brings some sort of happiness to you, then you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you show gratitude to him. And if وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ ضَرَّاء, and some sort of hardship or difficulty befalls you, then what should you do? فَصَبَرَ, and he becomes patient. He shows patience at the time of adversity. فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ, and that also is good for him. And that is, a believer has to have that kind of mindset, because if you don't have that mindset, you will never be able to deal with the hardships and the difficulty. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test you in good and bad. وَبَلَوْنَاهُمْ بِالْحَسَنَاتِ وَالسَّيِّئَاتِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you in good and bad. So whether good things come your way, thank Allah. It's a test also itself. Subhanallah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I want to finish off, inshallah, just because I think we're getting long on time, and
Yeah.
we're about to. Maghrib time's about to.
Yeah, we just went on, man.
So we'll talk more on other subjects as well, inshallah. As we know between ourselves, you're a very staunch Shafi'i and I'm a very staunch Hanafi. One day, inshallah.
I have.
But I wanted to just finish by saying something. I think a lot of what you mentioned is really on point, but I think it's also very, very important for us to really recognize that this Ramadan, I think, is the Ramadan Muslims Ramadan. I think this is the Ramadan that somebody who is looked at as a Ramadan Muslim, quote unquote, they are equal with everybody else. This is an equal playing field for everybody. Inshallah, we all have intention to go to the masjid and we'll get the reward. But everybody, whether they go to the masjid once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, or 100 times a year, 350 times a year, doesn't matter. Nobody's going to the masjid. And that is in and of itself such a beautiful thing, because the playing field is leveled. And what I would say, people get daunted. I know when I was younger, that was me as well. People get daunted sometimes hearing the idea of, well, his feet were swelling. My feet don't even swell when I run. How am I supposed to?
Yeah, I remember those tarawihs. You catch the imam right when he's about to go to ruku.
Exactly. I've had plenty of friends who did that. So, but I will say that I think this Ramadan, now is the time to just start on something small. As the Prophet ﷺ said, أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. the best thing you can do is consistent. That's what it is. It's about consistency, not about quantity. And if it's small, and the Prophet ﷺ narrates this hadith, Aisha radiallahu anha narrates it, who of course was one of the greatest scholars of Islam. She had such a high rank, and she was of course doing so many nawafil and different ibadat all the time. And yet he's telling her this, that the best thing you can do is not about quantity. It is about consistency, little by little. So I think the big thing for anybody who has maybe not been part of the community or felt like they're a bit away from Islam, they haven't felt part of the, the bigger picture. This is, I think, the best possible Ramadan, inshallah, for them as well. And I think that if we can all make an intention, at the very least, to start something small. Wallahi, reading one ayah of Quran a day and starting that and going through Ramadan, people are like, well, at that point, I'll have read 40 ayat. Who cares? But 40 ayat that lead into inevitably, and they always do. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلُنَا. Those who make an effort, Allah says He will guide them. So if you make that effort and make it consistently, then at the end of the day, insha'Allah ta'ala, we will find ourselves in a place where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens our hearts. Insha'Allah ta'ala.
Yeah, I think everything you said, 100% agree with it. It's going to be Ramadan, and where it's going to depend on our effort and our work and what we're going to accomplish, and we have to plan well to make sure that it becomes a Ramadan that's impactful and life-changing. But one thing I want to also mention is that for many people in your communities, Ramadan is going to be a challenge also, especially for those people who don't have food and things like that. Make sure that you check on those members of our community and around the world as this virus spreads. Make sure that you help those who are in that very difficult situation by giving a little bit more in Ramadan. If you have the means, give a little bit more. Be more generous. One of the qualities of the Prophet ﷺ in Ramadan was that he says, "Kana ajwadun nas." The Prophet ﷺ was the most generous. And look at the word that's used, ajwad. It's the highest level. Like there's no one more generous than you. فَكَانَ أَجْوَدُ النَّاسِ. He was the most generous person. وَأَجْوَدُ مَا يَكُونُ. And the most that he would be generous of his generosity would be in the month of Ramadan. So if you are gonna give charity, if you're gonna give, then give it in the month of Ramadan. Keep on giving, support people. People are really in a difficult situation, really, and we don't know, because many of us are in our homes and we don't know what's happening beyond the four walls of our houses. But really, people are gonna be in difficult situation. We want to make sure that people are able to fast and they have something to break their fast with. And that's the reality of some people in our community, in our ummah, and we need to all step up during this hard time to be more generous and more giving in the blessed month of Ramadan that is so close. Only less than 2 weeks? Less than 2 weeks?
11 days.
11 days.
11 days.
Wallahi, when you think about how Ramadan came so close this year, you just,
I was thinking about it just yesterday, and I was like, I was thinking about 3 days ago, and I was like, yeah, Ramadan is like a month away, right? And I was like, April 24th, it's April 10th. I was like, oh my God, it's 2 weeks away. But, I'll just finish with this, Sheikh, because you did it well. And,
we really finished this time now.
Yeah, for real. Everybody's saving money right now on their car insurance and their gas. A lot of people are, mashallah. So, take what you have that's extra that, you were planning to spend elsewhere and give it.
That's a good perspective. People are saving money on things that they didn't need. So they should be giving that in charity, May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to get through the blessed month of Ramadan, and make sure that we benefit from the days that are, the days that are limited but so blessed. Ayyam ma'dudat. May Allah allow us to reach the blessed month of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from us and make us among those who are emancipated at the end of Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Harith, Jazakallah khair for you're a good host, mashallah. I am. So inshallah, make dua and we'll see each other tomorrow.
Inshallah. Close it up with some dua, Sheikh, please, inshallah.
Oh, you make the dua, inshallah.
I keep it simple.
You are the musafir.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا مولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصل اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا مولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
جزاك الله خير.